Shalom, shalom to everyone watching. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero with the Ways of Israel, and we're continuing through the book To Be a Jew. And in today's video, we're going to take a look at behavior in the synagogue. Any community inhabited by at least 10 Jewish males should have a specially designated place where they can assemble for prayer. This place is called a Bet Knesset. The Yiddish term is usually used as a shul. So it literally means school. Residents of a town may compel one another to build a synagogue for themselves, to buy a Torah scroll and other sacred books for use in a Bet Knesset. In a place where there is no permanent daily minyan or quorum for service, members may compel each other to attend service. Synagogues and study halls where religious studies take place must be treated with respect and reverence. The holiness of a Bet Knesset, a synagogue, or sanctuary, and that of a Bet Midrash, a study hall, is great indeed. We are cautioned to be aware of the divine presence who always dwell therein, and to behave and to dress as well as to pray accordingly. In other words, even our dress should be not lacking modesty. As ancient temple in Jerusalem was a great temple, and by the way, by saying this, I think we should be able to start calling others, nations and leaders and politicians, to call on them to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. It's about time. An ancient temple in Jerusalem was a great temple, a great Bet Knesset, in which the Jewish faith was expressed. So is every synagogue and house of study considered a Mikdash Me'at, a small temple, a sanctuary, and a small spiritual replica. Yet I have been to them, as it says in Ezekiel, a little sanctuary. So one may not eat or drink in the sanctuary. One is not permitted to run about in the synagogue, but should walk with dignity and with respect. It is a great mitzvah to worship in the synagogue or house of study, for these places are sanctified. Now one should make a special effort to do so when one prays alone. The worship service, the public worship service that you'll see in the synagogues each morning and evening, while the afternoon mincha and evening mariv usually are combined and generally conducted just prior to and shortly after sundown, the schedule of the daily morning service and those of the Shabbat day may differ slightly from the congregation to congregation, so that one should be familiarized with a schedule of the local congregation. There's some synagogues that will have the morning prayers, and right afterwards, closer to mincha, have mincha in the afternoon, and then later arbit. So each community has its own particular time zone, so make sure you check it out, the different time zones. A complete public prayer service cannot be held unless at least 6 of the 10 or more who are present are active participants in the worship. If this is not the case, the reader does not repeat aloud the entire Amidah, but only the first 3 benedictions, enabling all of those present to recite Kedusha. He then proceeds to complete the Amidah silently. Many centuries of geographic dispersion and separation of the Jewish community has led to slightly different patterns of traditional prayer and a variety of customs that followed by traditional synagogue of different community. The basic order of service is, however, the same everywhere, based upon Talmudic guidelines and principles. They resemble one another, as they do not, despite a century-long separation, in the real source of amazement. The difference, quickly apparent to one who is familiar with the worship services, are really superficial. There's no basic clash of halakhic or religious legal principles in the variety of the customs that prevail. They only add colorful varieties of the Jewish synagogue and its life. There are 2 basic synagogue traditions and prayer liturgy, which are usually called as the Ashkenazic, referring to the practice followed by Jews in Central, Eastern, and Western Europe, and all of those who came from there, and the Sephardic practice, which followed by the Spanish Jewry and around the entire Mediterranean seacoast and their descendants. The difference between 2 synagogue liturgy can be traced back to the difference of opinion between ancient scholars of Eretz Israel and Babylonia. Ashkenazic Jewry was influenced by the tradition of Eretz Israel, whereas Sephardic Jewry adopted the Babylonian tradition. But even among the Ashkenazic Jews, Hasidic communities adopted some features of the Sephardic order of service, and so they would develop a Sephard liturgy, or Nusak Sepharad, or Sephard, even among the Ashkenazim. A difference quickly noted is in the recitation of Kaddish, which in the Sephardic version contains 4 more words, which is Veyitzmach Pukane V'karev Meshichei. The opening sentence of the Kedusha are also slightly different. The disciples of the great Ashkenazic scholar Eliyahu, or the Gaon of Vilna, followed his halachic ruling in matters of prayer and synagogue procedures, which differed in many respects to the practices prevailing in the Ashkenazic synagogue of his time. This liturgy is thus known as the Hagoan Reb Eliyahu, developed as Nusak Hagra. Because the disciples of the Vilna of Gaon played such a tremendous role in the early resettlement of Eretz Israel in the early 1800s, their influence upon Israel's synagogue has been profound, and a goodly number of Ashkenazic synagogues in Israel follows that liturgy. There are many more rules and regulations governing the order of the services and the various occasions, and these should be followed in accordance with the directions of the instructions of the rabbis, or of the rabbi, or in his absence in accordance with the guidance of a layman knowledge in the laws pertaining to prayer and the familiar with the tradition of the congregation. Now let's take a look at the ritual items you'll find in many synagogues. Synagogue, whether large or small, is designed elaborately and simply and must contain the following ritual items: the Holy Ark, or Aron Kodesh, a cabinet or a recess in the wall in which are kept the scrolls in the Torah scrolls, Sifrei Torah. This contains the covering of the Aron Kodesh, as they called a parachet. The Aron Kodesh is generally set on the wall in the direction of Eretz Israel in Israel towards Jerusalem. There should also be an eternal light, Ner Talmid, a lamp that is placed above and somewhat in front of the Holy Ark. It's allowed to burn continually. It is symbolic of the biblical directive to cause a lamp to burn continually in the tabernacle outside the parachet, which is before the Ark of the Testimony. This you'll also find in the Torah in Exodus chapter 27, verse 20 through 21. Then you have the bima, which is a platform traditionally set apart from the ark, on which it stands the shulchan, the table. From this table the Torah is read, and the congregation and reader, or Cantor, leads the congregation in service. In most Ashkenazic synagogues, there will be also an additional lectern, or you would say an amud, pulpit as it were, between the bima and the Aron HaKodesh on a lower level, in difference to the verse that says, "From out of the depth did I cry out to thee, O Lord," Psalms 130, verse 1, and from which some of the services are conducted. Though not essential, the candelabrum, the menorah, reminiscent of the 7-branch menorah of the temple, will generally be placed in a prominent place near the Aron HaKodesh or the bima, so not to duplicate the one in the temple. Either a 6 or 8-branch menorah is used. Aside from these items, whatever other Jewish religious or historical symbols may be displayed depends on the taste or wealth of the congregation and upon the advice of the architect of that particular synagogue. Stained glass windows, wall inscription, carving, and paintings can be expressed in many religious themes and can reflect a wide range of religious symbols and ritual objects of historic events in the life of the Jewish people from its very inception for over 3,800 years. The major restriction in these art forms is that no human figures are permissible in the synagogue, or at least facing towards the ark. In other words, where a person is praying, there should be no pictures or anything like that. There's also what's called the Ezrat Nashim, a section for the women. And by the way, just to let you know, the Ezrat Nashim in the temple used to combine not only the women but also those who were not Jewish. and this was the section that was utilized, an ancient and distinctive feature of the traditional synagogue. He follows the pattern established in the ancient Temple of Jerusalem, which provided an Ezrat Nashim so as to prevent light-headed levity and modest and unbecoming behavior between the sexes, and that might take place in a freely mingling crowd coming to the Holy Temple. At times, the Ezrat Nashim took the form of a balcony. At other times, it distinctively divided the section on the side or of the rear of the men's section by a mechitza. A mechitza, usually the size is between 38 inches high to 60 inches high. Interesting that Rabbi Norman Lamb wrote an article and many books regarding the importance of a mechitza in a synagogue and separate pews in the synagogue. Tradition, Volume 1, for the fuller treatment of this question in contemporary times. Copies can be obtained by the Rabbinical Council of America. You can also see the incredible book that he wrote called The Sanctity of the Synagogue, edited by Rabbi Baruch Litvin of New York and Sparrow Foundation. Now, other than the restrictions governing the interior arrangement of the synagogue that necessitated by the requirement of an Ezrat Nashim, there's also relative positions of the Aron HaKodesh and the Bima, and there are no other distinct architectural patterns required for the interior or exterior of the building. Synagogues have thus often provided opportunities for artistic and architectural creativity. Now let's take a look at the synagogue's personnel. You have the rabbi, also known as the Rav, as he's called in Hebrew. He is the religious head of the community for issues of spirituality and guidance. His traditional ordination is called a smicha. His rigorous training in and expert in the knowledge of Torah and Talmud and codes of Jewish law, and his personal faith and piety is the basis of the authority which a traditional community recognizes and accepts. In our day, Jewish communities in the diaspora are religiously organized around the synagogue so that each rabbi is the head of that community of the Jews associated in a particular congregation. The development has forced rabbis to become so concerned with the synagogue as an institution itself and become involved in the purely administrative concerns. As long as there is an institutional leadership is not permitted to take priority over and displace the rabbi's traditional and basic responsibility for spiritual leadership, there is much to be said in favor of this contemporary development. The rabbis must not only teach the Torah in the Jewish way of life, but what he says, but also be an example that he sets. So it's not just talking, it's living it out. He must not only teach Judaism, provide leadership to the religious institution of Judaism, he must personally reflect the values and the ways of the faith that he wishes to instill in others. Since the Torah confers authority on the spiritual leader to act as the judge in deciding religious questions brought before him, the rabbi must also in that capacity possess the expertise in the law that should be the decision-making powers that is necessitated. He must also be loyal and faithful to that law and committed to its underlying principles and axiom of faith. Now let's take a look at the Cantor. Cantor, just like the word says, he's the singer. He is the one that leads the prayer. It's mainly known as the Hazan in Hebrew. He fills the role as the emissary of the congregation, Shliach Zibbur, which he takes the prayer to Hashem in front of the congregation. He represents and leads the congregation in prayer before the Almighty, and in large, more affluent congregation, the position of the Cantor will be a full-time position. Although generally responsible for conducting only the main Shabbat service of the week and the holiday service, the main Shabbat service, he will also have other duties relating to the music and choral programs of the synagogue and religious school. In addition, he will be called upon to assist the rabbis in officiating at weddings, funerals, where appropriate vocal chanting contributes immeasurably to the service. Depending on the needs of the congregation, there are also duties and responsibilities in other areas of the synagogue's work and religious education that may be called upon to fulfill. If he has the religious education and qualification, he may be called upon to fulfill in those areas. As the daily services, however, On such an occasion, when the cantor is absent, a qualified worshiper in the congregation may be called to serve as a Shliach Zibbur, an emissary of the congregation in prayer. In smaller congregations where there's no official cantor is engaged, qualified members of the congregations are called upon to conduct the service. And in Judaism, any layman who possesses the educational background and religious merit, and every Jew should, is privileged to conduct all parts of the religious service. Jewish law sets the qualifications expected of one who serves as a permanent Shliach Zibbur, or Chazan of the congregation. He must be worthy and suitable person who is not tainted by any reputation or religious or moral transgression. One who is known to commit religious or moral transgression, please listen very importantly, is disqualified and must not be chosen. Here someone asked me, Rabbi, can a person who's gay, whose moral status is questioned? I say no. He should not lead the prayer in any congregation, and it can bring about the disaster of many people in that congregation. So, responding to that question, no. Jewish law sets forth the qualification expected of one who serves as a permanent Shliach Zibbur, or Chazan of a congregation. By the way, the same applies to someone who's not living a life of morality. Same thing applies. If he's a drunkard, if he's basically known to be someone who is constantly in a state of drinking and alcoholic in a sense, he should not serve either as a Shliach Zibbur. Anything that can basically bring down the merit of the congregation, and the congregation can be judged by the performance of the Shliach Zibbur, should not be performing the office of a Shliach Zibbur. He must be a worthy person, not tainted. He must also be modest in person, personally acceptable to the congregation. After all, he represents before the Lord, and thus must concur in that representation before the congregation. He should possess a pleasant voice, not one that's going to basically put everyone in a position of He should possess a pleasant voice, one that is sweet to the ears. Not only one who makes prayers experience more pleasant for one who's a worshiper, but deemed to be an expression of great honor to the Lord. Where an unsuitable or unworthy person is permitted to act as Shliach Zibbur on the account of his pleasant voice, his prayers are regarded by our religious tradition as unacceptable to the Holy One, blessed be He. It is in fact considered to'eva. We've heard that word used so many times, not only for a man who lies with a man, but also the way of a person's conduct, which is abominable. That too is to'eva. And those who do this withhold good from Israel, says the Mishnah Berurah on Orach Chaim 53:4. The cantor should be a person who understands what he's saying. This is why I say, if you don't know Hebrew, you can pray and be a Shliach Zibbur, but you have to know what you're saying in English or Spanish, or whatever language you're saying it in. You should know the meaning of the Hebrew prayers, preferably, and possess the faith to say them with sincerity. You must not be dull or foolish person, but one who can intelligently discuss and participate in the affairs of the community. He should be well versed in the various melodies and chant that are appropriate for the different services. In the past, one obtained such training by apprenticing oneself to an experienced Hazan, and in our days, there are many institutions where such cantorial training is offered. Voice and music training is also available to the contemporary Hazan to enhance his professional stature and qualification. If there cannot be one found who possesses all of these qualifications, then one should, with much wisdom and good deed, should be chosen. Should the choice be between an unlearned, mature person who has a pleasant voice and a lad, but 13, who understands what he's saying, but whose voice is not pleasant, the young man should be preferred. One should not be elected as a permanent Shliach Zibbur unless he has reached a level of maturity equivalent to the late teens. It is an asset for fulfilling this role, but the congregation may waive this honor and do it if it sees fit to do so. If it's only on one occasion, anyone who has passed the age of 13 may officiate. A chazan, who unduly prolongs the service, is not acting properly for its place, and excessive burden is being placed upon the congregation. There's some chazan, they have beautiful voice and they like to show off their voice. Don't do it at the expense of the congregation. Sometimes we can say the prayers are long enough by what our sages already gave us. Don't prolong it even further. Now the sexton. This is the shamash, it's called in Hebrew. It's a religious functionary who attends to many of the duties in the synagogue. He generally is in charge of supervising the daily service with the care of the maintenance of the ritual items of the synagogue, the prayer books, the Bible, the scrolls, and he often also is a Ba'al Koreh. He's the one that sometimes reads the prayer from the Sefer Torah, or as a substitute for the Cantor. He works with and assists the rabbis in many ways, including teaching. While there are no formal religious requirements for one to serve in this capacity, there are special schooling beyond that which his well-educated Jew is expected to possess and is required. The sexton is expected to be a pious person, to reflect a fairly sound level of Jewish education, but the better his background in Jewish study, the more competent he is in many religious skills, the more valuable he will be in the service to the congregation, and more varied the tasks and responsibilities which can be assigned to him. The Gabbai. The Gabbai is a term, or parnas, traditionally to be applied to the lay head of the Jewish religious community. In our days, he's like the president of the shul, or a lay officer of the congregation who acts in that capacity. He is assisted by the board of directors and have a primary responsibility for the financial maintenance of the synagogue, for setting its fiscal policies and conducting the general affairs of the congregation. In our next video, we're going to take a look at the role of the Kohen and what he is supposed to do in the synagogue. So stay tuned and continue with this study to be a Jew. Shalom.